regular meeting of the Beacon Board of Education. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. Mrs. Antelope-Everett. Here. Mrs. Gadsden. Here. Mrs. Galba. Here. Mr. Garnett.
Here.
Mr. Munoz. Excused. Ms. Patchen. Here. Mr. White.
Present.
Mr. Saab.
Here.
Mrs. Thompson. Here. Dr. Walkley, would you review the fire exits?
The fire exits are directly in front of the board. It's the doors that you came in, that you entered in.
I'd like to ask everyone to please stand for a moment of silence for Eugene Edmund Kosa, a retired math and computer science teacher at Beacon High School. Thank you. Dr. Walker, would you like to introduce our workshop tonight?
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Anna Marie Corderoni, who is going to do a presentation on the, excuse me, the veteran exemption.
Thank you. Good evening. This evening we're going to talk about the alternative veterans property tax exemption, which was signed into law last year by Governor Cuomo to allow districts to give property tax exemption to school district taxes. Property tax exemptions for veterans were granted since 1984. And Governor, again, as I said, Governor Cuomo signed the law in December 2013, allowing the school districts to offer a similar a veteran exemption. School districts must decide which exemption limit to provide and then hold a public hearing. And once that's done, a resolution by the board must be approved by March 1st. That information goes to the assessor's office so that it can be worked into the school taxes for next year. Who's eligible for this kind of exemption? Honorably discharged veterans, certain family members of veterans, including spouse, unremarried surviving spouse, or Gold Star parent. Just so you know, Gold Star parent is a parent of a child who died in the line of duty while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces during a period of war. And if the district wanted to allow the Gold Star parent, they would have to do a separate resolution for that when they were deciding which exemption to go with. Limited to veterans who served during defined periods of war or under certain conditions. And those limitations are similar to the property tax exemption. So the amount of the exemptions are pretty widespread. When contacting the assessor's office, I was given two different scenarios, and these mirror what other districts in Dutchess County are doing. The default exemption, which is on the left, shows the exemption amount for non-combat, combat, and then disability, which is again similar to the way the property taxes are done. The minimum, which is the lowest amount that the board can decide to do, is $6,000, $10,000, and $20,000. So let me explain how that works. That's the reduction of the assessment that once we calculate the school tax bill. So if you were in non-combat, you get $12,000, and then if you were in combat, you get the $12,000 plus the $20,000, and then so forth for the disability portion. So that's just a mirror. All of Dutchess County happens to be the county that has the most veteran exemptions, actually in the state, which surprised the real property office when I called them. All of the districts in Dutchess that do currently have the veteran exemption have the default exemption, except one. One decided to do the minimum exemption, and that was Millbrook. So this information, again, I was able to get from the real property office. So the number of exemptions, so non-combat exemptions currently in the Beacon City School District, 372. And the total equalized value of exemptions, that means the amount that would come off, that would be the amount that would be exempt from people's tax bills. Combat has, so of the 372, 301 are also combat, and then 80 of those are disability. And those show the amount of assessments that would be affected by these veteran exemptions. And this is the default. Obviously the same amount of exemptions, but the equalized value is more because the exemption amount that we would, the board would be deciding on would be more. And this will impact all taxpayers in the Beacon City School District. So by voting and allowing a veteran exemption, you're not increasing or decreasing taxes. What you're doing is you're just redistributing it to the other taxpayers in Beacon. The reason I put including senior citizens is our district does have a senior citizen exemption, so we try to minimize the amount that senior citizens pay for school taxes, but their taxes will go up a little bit incrementally as well. And I'll show you in a minute an example. So when we do the budget, I think it's easier and clearer to kind of see real dollars as to how much money your taxes would go up to make a decision. So again, I use the same information I do for the budget, a median assessed value with STAR. So these are all the current year amounts, obviously because I don't have an estimate of next year. So if the board were to decide to offer the default exemption for veterans, everybody else's taxes in the district would go up about $20 per year. And if they were to grant the minimum exemption, the taxpayers would go, this individual taxpayer would go up by $8 a year. The town of Fishkill, with a little different median assessed value home, their taxes would go up $24 per year for default and $12 for the minimum exemption. And in the town of Wappingers, it would be $31 per year for default and $16 for minimum. So that just kind of gives you an estimate of the two exemption amounts that we just saw. So what are our options? So we want to move forward. We need to conduct a public hearing, which gives the public at least 5 days' notice. So we will do our legal notices. We will do a presentation again, and then we can have the public come and ask questions. The board may adopt a resolution to accept the default exemptions, which were the higher amounts, which is what a lot of the other districts in Dutchess are doing. If the board wanted to, they must adopt a resolution if they wanted to include the Gold Star parent. If the board wanted to increase or decrease those default exemptions, they must hold a second public hearing. So we'd have to give another 5 days' notice, and we would have to have another public hearing after that. Or the board can decide that there's no action at this time and just remain status quo. I do also want to mention, just as an aside, this isn't an automatic exemption. So similar to the way you received a property tax exemption, the veteran must file an application with the local assessor, and there is required proof that would need to be done. And it does qualify for, the property must be owned by the veteran. And if for some reason the veteran had passed away, then there had to be their primary residence prior to that. So does the board have any questions about the veteran exemption? I just want to put up the other chart so you can kind of see. So, yes?
You talked about most districts in the area. Can you, one, repeat that piece?
Sure.
And also add on, I don't know if you know this information, how many districts are doing the Gold Star parent exemption? Do we know that as well?
I don't know about the Gold Star parent. I did ask the question of the real property office because I wanted to quantify the Gold Star parent, but that's something that's eligible for property. So if we did have Gold Star parent within our district, it would be included in those assessment numbers. So it's not anything in addition to if you decided to do the Gold Star parent. The chart up here now shows the exemptions for default and minimum. And the real property tax office explained to me that most of the districts in Dutchess County that have the veteran exemption have the default column. Okay, so they give the 12, the 20, and the 40,000. The minimum, there's only one other district in Dutchess, which is Millbrook, that has they went with the minimum exemption amounts, and they had to hold 2 public hearings.
So I guess just one more question.
Sure. No, it's
do
okay.
you know,
so you said most of the districts who are giving the exemption are giving the default, but do you know how many districts out of the Dutchess County districts are giving the veterans exemption at this point? I know it's ongoing each year.
Right.
You can.
Well, I know that there are several districts that had done it last year. So the law was put into effect December of 2013. There were a couple of districts that decided to go through this process because March 1st is the deadline for us to accept it and move forward to go to Real Property Office. The person that I spoke to in Real Property told me that most of the people now are in the same process as we are as far as moving it forward. So last year was kind of a short period of time. There was a lot going on. Real Property gave us an estimate. This year they're actually able to give us real numbers with the computer software that they have, which was wonderful because then it's not a guessing game about how much more people will pay. So I just want to make sure that people understand that it's just a redistributing of the tax levy. So when we talk about the budget and the levy, the veterans will get a break in their taxes, but then the smaller amount will be redistributed to the other taxpayers. Does anyone else on the board have any questions?
Just I want to make sure I understand that those exemptions are cumulative. So if I was disabled in combat, I would get the 12 plus the 20 plus the 40?
Yes. Yes.
And
that's an amount that reduces your assessment, and then the tax rate is applied to that.
And also, just want to make sure I understand that if we grant the exemptions, this has no impact on the 2% levy cap, correct?
No, that's a good question because the person in the Real Property Office, I asked that question too, and she actually lives in Wappingers, and Wappingers voted for it last year. So we checked her. We actually pulled her taxes and checked, and it does not impact that at all. That was my main concern too, but it was fine. So she got a check for the true amount.
And the other thing, it might be a little confusing for people because if they're assuming that their taxes aren't going to go by more than 2%, I mean, we would grant this since we're redistributing the tax levy amongst a smaller base in some ways. People's taxes may go up by more than 2%.
Right, which would be a good point for me to make sure that, if we move forward with this, that I mention that during the budget process as well. But then, as you mentioned, the good news is that they will get the rebate check now for the higher amount compared to last year's taxes. So the decision really has to be made about default versus minimum, okay? Just to try to get an idea from the board as to what they want to move forward with. And then at the next board meeting, we were planning on doing a public hearing, which would be very similar to what I've said tonight, but at least it would be advertised as a public hearing. We could have people from the public come and ask questions again. And then we were planning, again, if you wanted to move forward with this, to do the resolution the first or latest the second meeting in February because it needs to go to the assessor's office by March 1st.
If the board were to decide, would that make February the public hearing?
I was hoping to do the public hearing at the next board meeting in January.
In January?
Just because of snow, I don't want to leave it too close to March 1st.
Okay.
So 2 weeks from tonight would be the public hearing.
But tonight we need to decide default versus minimum
Right,
and go or no go.
right.
So how best we do that, through a roll call?
Or just I just need a consensus as to how to move forward.
I'd like to move forward with the default, but I'd also like to recognize the Gold Star parent.
Well, the amounts that are in here, the total assessed, I know, I'm sorry, it's
can't
to your
see
back.
it.
But the amounts that we talked about, if there is a Gold Star parent, they are already included in there. It won't be any different than what those numbers are, so.
Right, but we have to recognize it separately. It's a separate
Yes.
resolution?
Mhm.
Right.
So, if the board feels they want to move forward with the default, then when I do the public hearing, the next board meeting, I will just talk about the default, and then if they're all in agreement about the Gold Star parent, I will just talk about the Gold Star parent. because I imagine there may be other taxpayers here that may ask the question about, their taxes going up. It was nice to have the veterans come and, and see that part of it. So I just want to make sure that we go
Could
forward.
we listen to, were they going to speak at public session? Did they sign up to speak at
Yes, they
public?
did.
Could we wait to vote until after we hear them? I don't know if people are teetering, it might make an impact. Or, I'm ready to go forward, but I don't know other people.
What's everyone's thought? Would you like to?
I have a process question. So all we're deciding to do is whether or not to have the public hearing. We still need like a final decision after the public hearing is held. Is that correct? Because we're getting public input. And so this is just a go forward and have a hearing. This isn't like our final. Okay.
So then I can do the public hearing very similar to what I said tonight as far as, I do need to go forward, whether the board wants to go forward with this, which it sounds like. Okay,
All those in favor of going forward?
Aye.
okay. Okay.
Thank you, Henry. May I have a motion for executive session?
Motion to adjourn to executive session to review the employment history of a particular individual, and the board will return as soon as possible.